Welcome to D&D Optimized, the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and we do our best to theorycraft on them and see if we can't make them as powerful as possible, finding cool, fun synergies, and trying to optimize them, as it were. If you, like me, enjoy character creation and theory crafting in D&D almost as much as playing the actual game, then welcome home. This is a place for you. So we are super happy to have you. My name's Colby. I am your host, and thanks for being here. So, according to YouTube analytics, the vast majority of people who watch my videos don't listen to the last 30 to 40 seconds. And I make some very important announcements that I don't want you guys to be missing, so I'm going to make them now. Here we go. Point number 1. I love you guys, and you're awesome, and that's important for you to know. Point number 2. Check out our subreddit. We do have a subreddit, and we're growing a nice, cool little community, I think, so you can continue the conversation and or throw up questions that you have or maybe builds that you want other people or me to take a look at. And I don't respond to every thread, but I do my best to at least read all of them, and I respond to a lot of them. So anyway, if you like the show, of course, please subscribe, like, share, comment, all of the things. It really helps us. We're growing nicely, and I thank you for that. And I'm looking for ideas when we hit 5,000 subscribers, which probably will happen in the next couple of months, I think. So if you've got one, feel free to share it. I threw out on my Sliding Into My DMs episode last week about potentially doing an ASMR video, as somebody had requested, and that got some positive response. But know, please, that it would probably be more of a parody of an ASMR video, but it could be fun and or funny if you want to laugh at me. Anyway, finally, make sure to check out the graphs and the math and things if you're interested. I do spend a lot of time kind of crunching numbers and plotting graphs and then comparing builds that I do to other builds that I've done and things like that. So anyway, you can find those in the show notes and the video description. So that's all the announcements. Thanks for listening. Today, we are going to do another team up build. I've only done a couple of these, and the ones that I've done, you guys seem to like. It feels a little unique and cool and fun. So I wanted to do another one. The two characters that I'm going to be kind of diving in on are both ones that I've had requests for, but rarely to put them together. I think this would be a ton of fun to play with a friend. The team up is a cleric rogue combination, and specifically an Order Cleric and a Phantom rogue, though they do some multi-classing. The concept is this. One, the cleric, of course, is sort of the support character, the one who is built to empower their friend as much as possible, with buffs, with heals, with additional attacks. So they are the battery, they are the juice of the combo, and the rogue is basically, after having been empowered to the nth degree, is just a power blender. And they turn all of their enemies into pulp. And so, without further ado, and no super long preamble for once, I present episode 26, The Battery and the Blender. Let's jump in. All right, at level 1, Blender. So we're doing 2 characters, right? So I'm gonna have to do every level for every character. We're probably going to go long, and my episodes have just been getting longer and longer, as some of you know. Most of you say, it's fine. Some of you say, dude, you talk too much, and that's okay. And hopefully you can put me on 2 times speed or use the chapter things down below to skip ahead if you need to. But anyway, I'm going to do my best to be concise and probably fail. Level 1, the Blender. We're starting off with the class of the Barbarian, and you're thinking, you said this was a rogue build. I know, but hang on. There's a few things that we get out of Barbarian that are really great for us. First off, Rage. Rage is fantastic. It gives us extra damage. It gives us resistance. Second off, we want a martial class that can potentially get to 2 attacks in a turn. With extra attack, and the Barbarian does that for us. And most importantly, thirdly, the Barbarians get easy access to advantage on every turn, or every attack that they make in their turn, I should say, which is big, right? And number 4, it's just cool because it's very rarely done, a Barbarian rogue build, right? For a couple of reasons, which we'll discuss. The downsides, of course, are, 1, it's going to delay our rogue levels, but trust me, it's worth it. Another downside, there's kind of some weirdness with the Barbarian and the Rogue together, in that in order to take advantage of Rage, the Barbarian needs to be making attacks with strength, right? Strength-based weapon attacks. And rogues tend to generally favor dexterity for a number of reasons. Not that they have to, but it benefits them in a lot of their roguey abilities, like, disarming traps and stealthing and all of those things. So it can potentially make this character a little bit mad, right? Multiple ability score dependent. So anyway, that's a little funky, but we're going to just deal with it. So for our race, we're going to go custom lineage, because we get a +2 to an ability score, which we'll put into strength, and a free feat, which we really, really want for this build. And that free feat is the Revenant Blade feat. Do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. That's your Walt Whitman quote for the day. So here's the thing. I know I put out an entire 30-minute short video a couple of weeks ago on why the double-bladed scimitar was not as good as two-weapon fighting or great weapon fighting when you do the math for the most part. But in this case, we're going to make an exception for some really good reasons. First off, we need our weapon to be a finesse weapon in order to get advantage from sneak attack damage. When rogues make attacks, if they want to get sneak attack, it has to be done with a finesse weapon, right? So the double-bladed scimitar covers that if we take the Revenant Blade feature. And again, we don't have to use dexterity as our plus to hit and plus to damage when we make an attack with a finesse weapon. We just can, but the weapon itself has to be classified as a finesse weapon. Okay. Let's see. And so yeah, outside of Shadowblade, the double-bladed scimitar, as far as I know, someone's probably going to correct me, and that's okay, is the hardest hitting finesse weapon in game, because 2d4 on the main hand attack is ever so slightly better than the 1d8 that you would get from a rapier on average, right? The 2d4 is on average 5, 1d8 on average is 4.5. So anyway, 2d4 is greater than 1d8. The other great thing about the double-bladed scimitar is, of course, it lets you make, as a bonus action, you can make an offhand, essentially, or another attack with the other side of your double-bladed scimitar. There's 2 blades, right? Think of it as like a staff or like a pole with 2 scimitars, one on each end. So you can hit with one and then bonus action hit with the other. The other only does 1d4 of damage, but you get to add your, in our case, strength modifier to the damage. And so if you were doing 2-weapon fighting instead, short sword, because they have to be light weapons unless you take a feat, right? And you could potentially be rapier, but even then, you would have to have the 2-weapon fighting style in order to be able to add your ability score modifier to the damage of the bonus action attack. And barbarians do not get fighting styles. Yes, we could take a feat for it at some point. Yes, we could take a level in fighter or ranger, I guess, to pick it up. But we're going to be very jealous of every single one of our levels because for every 2 levels of rogue for this build, we're going to get an extra 2d6 of damage per round. And yes, I said 2d6 on purpose. So anyway, it just lets us kind of get right into our damage as quickly as possible and sort of check all of the boxes of things that we need as far as being a finesse weapon, getting to weaponize our bonus action, and still add our ability score modifier to that weaponized bonus attack. And there's one other reason. It won't come until later, but later on we're going to benefit greatly from having all of our attacks be made with the same weapon instead of 2 different ones. And we'll get into that, like I say, later. Final reason, double-bladed scimitars are just cool. I mean, they just the concept of them is cool. I think the imagery and the way that I imagine them looking and being used in combat, I love, and I think it feels cool. And a lot of you have requested that I try and create a character built on using the double-bladed scimitar. So anyway, that's what we're doing. It's going to be great. One thing about the Revenant Blade feat. It does have a prerequisite that you be an elf. And yes, we took custom lineage, and we get into this all the time, but hopefully at your table, you can take custom lineage and still call yourself a custom elf and thereby qualify for this feat. If that doesn't work at your table, that's fine. Take an elf of your choosing, enjoy the additional little perks and abilities that you get as just an actual elf instead of custom lineage, and then you're just gonna have to pick up Revenant Blade when you hit level 4. And you might be a little bit behind in your damage, but it's not going to be crippling, and it'll still work. So anyway, the Revenant Blade feat is fantastic. It makes the double-bladed scimitar a finesse weapon. Otherwise, it is not, and thereby, again, you couldn't get sneak attack damage otherwise. So you need it for that. And it gives us a +1 to our AC, which is awesome. And it gives us a +1 to our strength or dex. Of course, we're going to take strength, and thereby allows us to start with an 18 strength right at level 1, because moving on to abilities, assuming point buy as always, you're going to buy 15 in strength, 15 in strength, you get +2 for your racial, +1 for your feat. So 18 total. 14 constitution, 14 dexterity, and then whatever else you want to do. For equipment, so barbarians can start with any martial melee weapon, and so obviously take a double-bladed scimitar. They are expensive. They are 100 gold, and so if you tried to go gold buy here, that would take up most of your gold, and you probably wouldn't be able to afford other things that you need. So just go ahead and take standard equipment, grab the double-bladed scimitar for your martial weapon, right, I already mentioned this. Here's the problem with going standard equipment, right? You barbarians don't actually start with any armor. You're proficient in light and medium armor, but you don't start with any medium armor. Of course, again, if you did gold buy, 100 gold for the double-bladed scimitar probably wouldn't leave you with enough to pick up some good medium armor. Scale mail is 50 gold, right? And so unless you roll really well on that gold buy roll, you're just going to have to settle for naked for now. So hang out in your loincloth like any good barbarian would, and start saving your money. Because we do get, as a level 1 barbarian, we do get unarmored defense, which lets you add your constitution and your dexterity modifiers to your armor class. But our con and our dex are only 14, so +2, +2. So we're at a 14 armor class. It's not fantastic. start saving your money. Eventually, you'll be able to get up to half plate, and that'll put you at a 17 total. And that's respectable, especially because we're going to be getting resistance to most of the damage that we take because of rage. So let's just talk about rage, make sure we're all clear on how it works. For now, as a bonus action, you can enter a frothy, frenzied rage, right? It lasts for a minute. You have to always make sure that you either take damage or make an attack every turn, or you'll lose your rage. But while raging, you get an extra 2 to damage on every attack that you make, every strength-based weapon attack that you make. And then you have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. And that includes magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. I've made a mistake on this channel in the past when I talk about it. And yes, it's true. You wouldn't have resistance, obviously, to other spell damage types. But really, most damage that you take, unless you have a very mean DM or you're running a very odd campaign with lots of unique monsters and lots of spellcasters or whatever, most of the damage that's going to be coming your way is bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. So that's great to take half damage on all of that, right? While raging, you can't be wearing heavy armor, which is fine, and you can't cast or concentrate on spells, which is also fine, because any spells that we wanted to take would probably be to add damage to our attacks and or give us advantage. And we already get those things out of the Barbarian. We'll talk about the advantage in a minute. So level 1 for the battery. Your class is Cleric, and it will remain Cleric. We're not doing any multi-classing on the battery. There's just too many juicy things throughout the build that I don't want to delay. For the race, I'm going back to my old standby, the Variant Human. We want a free feat, but the one that we're taking doesn't have racial prerequisites, nor does it give a stat bonus, so there's no real impetus to go with the custom lineage. So we might as well go Variant Human, I think. Mix it up a little. But again, not necessary. You'll just want to take a feat once you hit level 4. The feat that we want is the Magic Initiate Wizard feat. I want a familiar, and I don't want a multi-class to get it. So that's what we're doing here. The feat Magic Initiate Wizard lets us choose one first level spell from the wizard class, in our case, from the wizard spell list, and we get to cast it once per day. And hopefully we won't even need to do it that often, because we're going to take Summon Familiar, which, once we've summoned that familiar, it lasts until we dismiss it or it dies, basically. And so it's awesome. We'll talk about why we want it momentarily. As for your cantrips, you get a couple of cantrips. Have fun with it, but I would take at least Booming Blade, if not Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade. We're going to be assuming that we're making weapon attacks every turn, but we only get one as a cleric. We're never going to get extra attack. We're not multi-classing. We're not going to be 2-weapon fighting for a bonus action attack, so we just get one attack. Might as well cast Booming Blade for that attack, or Green Flame Blade, and get a little extra damage tacked on to that one attack that we make. So that that gives us some nice perks, that feat. As far as the familiar, again, the way it works is you summon a familiar. It can take a form, of like a cat or an owl or a bunch of different things, and then you can get some nice benefits. You can see through its eyes, essentially, and kind of scout ahead. You can communicate telepathically with it, and it does, in combat, roll, and it has its own initiative. It cannot attack, but it can take the help action, as we've discussed, several times on the channel before. And so you are going to be essentially using your familiar to take the help action and give advantage to one attack, because it only works for the next attack after the help action is taken. But one attack from your blender, which will be important, and we'll discuss it. I have Preston staring at me very creepily through the window right now. Okay, sorry. Yes, the reason why I recommend that you take an owl, the reason being that owls get a cool feature that they can take the help action, swoop in, and then they get the flyby feature, which means they can fly away without taking an opportunity attack. And your familiar only has 1 hit point, so they are very fragile. And if your DM decides to target it, it will not live long. So don't make it any easier than it needs to be to kill. As for equipment, here comes it. What's up, Mr. Rogers? How's it going, guys? Equipment. You guys want to talk about equipment for the Order Cleric? Right. Sorry about that. Equipment for your cleric. So, standard stuff. Make sure that you grab some chainmail because you are proficient with heavy armor. Because as your divine domain, clerics do get to take their subclass at first level, right? And for your divine domain, you're going Order Cleric, as we've mentioned. So, Order Clerics are so good for our purposes, especially. You get proficiency with heavy armor, like I mentioned. And then the thing that we're really here for, you get a feature called the Voice of Authority. When you target an ally with a spell of first level or higher, it's too bad it can't be a cantrip, they can immediately use their reaction to make 1 weapon attack against a creature of your choice. If your spell targets multiple allies, then you choose who gets the attack. This is so powerful, especially for our blender. We'll talk about that momentarily. Spells. Bless is one of my favorite buffs, and you get that at first level as a cleric. So, excuse me, it lets you target 3 allies. Up to 3 allies. You can upcast it for more allies. It does require concentration, but then each of those who are targeted by the Bless spell get to add a d4 to all of their attacks and all of their saving throws until the spell ends. Lasts a minute, I believe. And that is so good. For you, if you cast it on yourself, potentially, and for your allies. I'd pick up Cure Wounds, probably because it's slightly bigger healing, but Healing Word is going to be kind of our go-to spell, I think, for the most part, for a couple of reasons. One, you can it's a heal. It only does I think it's a d4 plus your wisdom modifier of healing, but you can use it from range. You can use it as a bonus action, and it's just going to be really good for us to use on our blender to get them going, to get them extra attacks. The reason why I like Healing Word is because even though it heals for a little bit less than Cure Wounds, it still leaves our action free to potentially use the Booming Blade cantrip and make a weapon attack, and that'll be some nice damage. It's not going to be nearly as much as your blender's doing, but since I'm trying to optimize this companionship for damage, every little bit helps, and what the battery can add will be a nice little bump. So right from the get-go, combat for this team is going to look like this. The blender takes their turn. I mean, who knows who goes first, but regardless, blenders takes their turn, makes 2 attacks, right? 1 with their action, 1 with their bonus action. Then the battery, let's say it's the first round of combat, battery is going to cast Bless on multiple people, including the blender. Thereby the blender will get to use their reaction to make yet another attack. After that, going forward, when needed and when the battery has spell slots available, they'll be, going Healing Word as a bonus action to give the blender an extra attack, and then taking an action attack to do Booming Blade and get some nice little damage with their mace. You probably just have like a 1d6 weapon because you don't have proficiency in martial weapons, and that's fine. Use a shield. I should have mentioned that, I guess, in the equipment. You want a shield, you want your chainmail, so you've got a decent AC and you're pretty tanky. So right from the beginning, that blender is going to be getting potentially 3 attacks in a turn, as long as the battery has spell slots, right? Which is fantastic at level 1, and it's just going to get better. At level 2, the blender gets Reckless Attack. So now we get advantage on all of our attacks that we make during our turn. That's important, which is super fantastic, at the cost of giving our enemies advantage against us until our next turn, which is not. Here's the thing, though. One, again, because you're raging, you have resistance to most of the damage that you'll be taking. Again, in my experience, your experience may differ. Most of the vast majority of the damage that characters take in game is, slashing, bludgeoning, or piercing. It won't always be, but good to know. But also, you have an ally who is dedicated to almost full-time healing on you. So when you're taking half damage on most things, and you've got somebody who's pretty dedicated to healing you almost every turn, it makes you a pretty good tank, because you can soak damage pretty well and survive, but also you do a lot of damage and the enemy has advantage on their attacks against you, so you are an attractive target. So that means that you're going to be drawing a lot of the enemy fire, keeping your allies safe for the most part, and with some pretty decent survivability, and pumping out a ton of damage. So all of those things together make you a very powerful and threatening character. You also, at Barbarian level 2, get Danger Sense, which gives you advantage on dexterity saves against things you can see, like traps and spells and things. That's very nice to help you mitigate damage to something you're potentially weak against, like a fireball spell or something, and that will be even better later when we couple it with a nice rogue feature. Level 2 of the battery, so you get Channel Divinity, which, as we all know, lets you turn undead. You try to turn undead creatures, and if they fail their wisdom save, they have to run away from you for a minute, which is great. But also, as an Order Cleric, you get a Channel Divinity option that lets you try and charm an enemy instead. Not bad. My favorite thing for this build is the new feature from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Harness Divine Power, which lets you once per day, for now, it scales at 6 and then at 18 again to more times per day. But for now, once per day, you can burn a use of your Channel Divinity to regain spell slots. You just regain one spell slot, equal to half of your proficiency bonus rounded up. So this is just going to let you have more spells to be able to potentially cast on your blender to grant them extra attacks and thereby more damage. And since your Channel Divinity resets on a short rest, it's especially nice if you're about to take a short rest and you have a Channel Divinity slot available that you haven't used, go ahead and burn Harness Divine Power, regain a spell slot, take a short rest, and now you've got your Channel Divinity back. At level 3 for the blender, Barbarians get their Primal Path, their subclass. I'm going to recommend Zealot. First off, I think it works great thematically, right? Your battery ally companion in battle is a cleric, and they are healing you and buffing you and granting you all these extra attacks with their divine power. It just seems natural that you would maybe sort of develop an affinity for their religion or god as well. You also get 2 fantastic features as a Zealot Barbarian. One, Divine Fury, which lets you, once per turn, do an extra 1d6 plus half of your Barbarian level, rounded down, in damage to the first enemy that you attack that you hit in combat. So right now that's a d6 plus 1 for us, and it will go up next level. But anyway, so a nice little damage bump. But then you also get Warrior of the Gods, which lets your battery, or someone else, I guess, for that matter, resurrect you, bring you back to life. If you die, they can cast their, say, Revivify spell on you without having to spend the expensive component of, 300 gold in diamond dust or whatever, which actually can be really nice for this build because you might be dying a lot, especially early in the game, since you will be such a threat on the battlefield, and they will have advantage on all of their attacks against you. Even though you have resistance to a lot of that damage, you still might be going down a lot at these early levels especially. So being able to be rezzed without an expensive component will be really great for your team, actually. Also, very importantly, at level 3, barbarians get 3 rages per long rest now instead of just 2. And I feel like if we want to consider this rage damage and benefits sort of sustainable, we've got to get at least to 3 in order to say, 3 times per day. I mean, every DM is different, obviously, but I think you can assume that you should have it available most, if not all, of your combat encounters. Again, your experience may vary depending on your DM, but having 3 is much better than 2. The battery at level 3 gets second level spells, and there's some great options. Aid is a really good one. It lasts 8 hours, it doesn't require concentration, and it increases the max hit points of 3 allies and then heals them for 5 hit points, basically. So it increases their max and then, tops them off. That's not a ton of hit points, but, it adds up. Every little bit adds up. And at level 3, an extra 5 hit points for 3 characters can be the difference maker a lot of times, right? And so wait to cast it in combat. Choose the 3 targets, make sure one of them's your battery, and he gets an extra attack out of it as well. So that's a good one. What else? Warding Bond. Warding Bond is nice. It does require, it lasts an hour, doesn't require concentration, and it gives your chosen ally, I'm presuming your blender, a +1 to their armor class, and resistance to all damage. But then when they take damage, you take the same amount in return, right? So this is obviously really good if the damage being dealt is not piercing, bludgeoning, or slashing, because your blender already has resistance to those, assuming they're raging. But if there's a lot of magic damage going on or something else, this can be a good one to increase their survivability a little bit. And again, give them an extra attack when you cast it on them. Let's talk about spiritual weapon. So normally this is a second level spell, and normally it's kind of a no-brainer go-to for most clerics, right? It lets you get some nice damage out of your bonus action, and it uses your wisdom modifier to hit and to damage. You can upcast it so it scales. It doesn't require concentration. It's a really good spell. I'm probably gonna pass with this build in particular, and the reason is this. Healing Word, as I've mentioned, though it heals for slightly less, is just a lot easier to count on because you can cast it from range, and you just might not always be within touch to use Cure Wounds. More importantly, as I've mentioned, it's a bonus action, and that's what you would need to use in order to get something out of Spiritual Weapon. I like making a melee attack with Booming Blade here, and then using Healing Word, as opposed to, say, using Cure Wounds and then a Spiritual Weapon attack. Your melee weapon attack is just going to scale a little bit better for this character than Spiritual Weapon would. Booming Blade is going to scale, and you also are going to have Divine Strike once you hit level 8, and then again at 14, which also scales. And so when you add all of those things together, it's just going to scale a lot better for no resource cost, right? Whereas you'd have to continually be upcasting Spiritual Weapon in order to make that do more damage every round. Instead, I think it's just easier and a little more effective to make a melee weapon attack and then bonus action Healing Word. You may disagree, and that's fine. If you want to be a better cleric and buff your wisdom and thereby get better healing and also, damage from your spiritual weapon, and then just rely on action spells to cast on your blender to get them those extra attacks, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. I prefer to stick with melee attacks for this guy. So let's see. Level 4, Blender. If you're really anxious to get into rogue levels, maybe especially if you are kind of the only rogue and are supposed to sort of fill the rogue role in your party, you could potentially start taking rogue levels here. I would at least make sure you get to Barbarian 3 for rage, reckless attacks, the really nice zealot features, and the extra rage that you get at level 3, right? I think at least getting that far is important. If you're just worried about numbers and just worried about damage, you're going to be better off still going with Barbarian here. I know on the one hand, starting to get sneak attack damage is going to be nice, right? If you took if you started taking rogue levels now, you'd be 2 rogue levels ahead of the Barbarian who goes to Barbarian 5, which is our plan. And thereby you would always be 1d6 of sneak attack damage ahead every turn, and actually 2d6 per round, therefore. And I'll explain why in a minute, in case you don't know. But you're going to get more mileage out of a second attack than you will out of 2d6 more of sneak attack damage. And so at level 5 of Barb, that's when we get extra attack and we get to make another weapon attack, right? So again, better off. And not only that, but we're about to get our first ability score increase or feat if we go one more level into Barbarian here, right? And otherwise we'd have to wait 4 levels in Rogue. So I think we're just better off going 5 to Barbarian. So here at level 4, we are just going to get an ability score increase. We're going to bump our strength and cap it at 20. So already at level 4, we're capped on our strength, which feels really great. The battery is also, of course, going to get an ability score increase or feat. To be honest with you, I've really been having a hard time knowing which ability score increases and feats to take when for this character. There are so many things that I want. Resilient constitution is big for us, so that we can maintain our concentration more than anything. Taking strength points would increase our damage. Taking wisdom would make us a better cleric, generally speaking. Because this build is trying to push the limits of what's possible damage-wise, sustained damage-wise. And because only having a 15 strength like this character currently does just makes me cry when I'm trying to make weapon attacks, I'm actually going to do a +1 to strength and a +1 to constitution here for my ability score increase. So I'd have a 16 strength and a 17 constitution. You may think I'm an idiot, and that's okay. And if you want to be a better support or cleric and heal for more and have a higher, difficulty check on your spells and all of those things, go ahead and buff wisdom or whatever else you think makes more sense. But that's what I'm going to do. At level 5, the Blender hits Barbarian 5. They get their extra attack. And they also get fast movement, which grants an extra 10 more feet of movement speed, which is always welcome. And so now again, you're getting 3 attacks per turn, plus a 4th if your battery has a spell slot to burn on you, right? And that's so cool. Level 5, battery, gets 3rd level spells. Again, always lots of great options. Beacon of Hope is one that I'll mention. So it targets any number of allies, including your Blender, of course, and gives them advantage on wisdom and death saving throws, which, again, depending on what enemies you're fighting, could be great, or depending on if they're about to die, could be great. And it causes any healing that you do on them while you maintain the spell and concentration to heal for max hit points, which is really strong. I mean, that will heal for a lot more, right? Again, because it requires concentration, it means you'd have to choose between this and Bless. It might be worth turning off Bless if the situation's looking dire in particular, and you really need lots of big heals. Another option as a 3rd level spell here is Mass Healing Word, which is like Healing Word, but on multiple targets, right? Great for topping off multiple friends in a pinch. And you get your first resurrect spell, Revivify, which will bring a target back to life as long as they've died within a minute. And fortunately for you, you can cast it on your zealot friend without the expensive material component. The other 3rd level spell I'll talk about is kind of another one of those, every other cleric should take this, but maybe not us, and that's Spirit Guardians. It's so good, and it's really strong. It requires your concentration, and so you're using up a spell slot and not getting an extra attack from your Blender out of it, which is a bummer. It does good damage. in an area to targets round after round. But again, like I say, it requires concentration. It takes up a precious spell slot. The enemy would take 3d8 on a failed save, or half otherwise, but we don't have a great spell DC, at least not the way that I'm building it. Your experience may differ. So, is that better than giving a plus d4 to hit to 3 of your allies, especially when you get an extra attack from your blender out of it when you cast that spell? It's just going to depend on how many enemies your Spirit Guardians may hit in a given turn, if they have a high AC or if they have a high Wisdom save, what you're putting points into for your own ability score increases and all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to assume when we crunch the numbers that we're not using Spirit Guardians, that you're still using Bless as your concentration. Again, of course, you assess the situation, make the call, you do you. Also, your Booming Blade, now that you're 5th level, your Booming Blade attack does get an extra 1d8 on hit. And then, of course, as we all know, when you hit them with Booming Blade, if they move before your next turn, then they're going to take additional damage, and now it's 2d8 damage. Alternatively, you might be using Green Flame Blade to hit the target, and then it bounces and does damage to somebody standing next to him, and that's fine too. Again, Green Flame Blade would also get an extra 1d8 damage on the initial hit now. Finally, clerics at 5th level get Destroy Undead. So if you're using your Channel Divinity to turn undead, and the undead creatures are of a challenge rating 1/2 or lower, so you're kind of low-level skeletons and things like that, if the undead fails its save, instead of being turned and having to run away, it just explodes. And there's nothing cooler than exploding a bunch of low-level undead creatures as a cleric to make you feel awesome. At level 6, our blender is going Rogue One. So there is actually an argument to go Barbarian 6 here. Zealot Barbarians get a nice little feature to help with their survivability, but more importantly, you get a 4th rage per day at level 6 Barbarian. And so if your Dungeon Master is prone to regularly give you 4 or more combat encounters between long rests, give it a thought. You might want to consider Barbarian 6. Otherwise, plan on going Rogue One here. That's what I'm going to do. Because my DMs tend to not give us that many combat encounters per long rest. I'd say 3 is pretty average. Anyway, at Rogue One, you get a few features. You get Expertise, right, which lets you take a skill that you're proficient in and double your proficiency bonus for that skill. For 2, you pick 2 skills, which is great. And especially as if we're trying to be a rogue, being able to double your proficiency in stealth and things like that. Will be very important. You can double your proficiency bonus in Thieves' Tools as well if you need to. Sneak Attack. Double your proficiency bonus when you use Thieves' Tools, I should say. Sorry. Okay, Sneak Attack. Here we go. So as long as the attack is made with a finesse weapon, which ours is, right? Even though we're using strength for the attack, it is a finesse weapon. And you either have advantage on the attack or you have an ally within 5 feet of the enemy you're attacking, then you, once per turn, get to add sneak attack damage. And right now for us, that's just 1d6, and it goes up, like I've said, every 2 levels. Fortunately, we always have advantage on our attacks on our turn, thanks to Reckless Attack, right? And so once per turn, when we make a hit, we're going to add that 1d6 plus the Zealot Barbarian 1d6 plus half of our Barbarian level. That's also once per turn. So here's the great thing that I'll bet most of you know, but I'll bet there's some of you who don't. And when I first learned this, I only learned this a few months ago. So I don't know. I'm hoping that I wasn't the last one to the party. Sneak attack damage is applied once per turn. It is not necessarily applied once on your turn only, right? You do get it on your turn, But if you get an attack on someone else's turn, you can also apply sneak attack damage. So when you use a reaction to make an attack, you are taking that attack on someone else's turn. If it's an opportunity attack, someone's running away and you get an opportunity attack as a reaction, that's that character's turn that you're doing that damage on, and would therefore be able to apply the sneak attack damage bonus. Similarly, if you happen to have an Order Cleric battery in your party that's constantly casting spells on you, and then you get to use your reaction to make an additional weapon attack, yes, you can apply your sneak attack damage. That is so fabulous, and it's really the main reason why we're going rogue, coupled with this Order Cleric as our blender battery. Keep in mind, again, as I've mentioned, when you are, as a barbarian, are using reckless attack, you only get advantage on your turn. So on your reaction turns, you don't necessarily have advantage, and this is why the battery took a familiar, so that the familiar could take the help action in order to give you advantage on the reaction attack that you're making. So now you have advantage on all of your attacks and always get to apply your sneak attack damage when you land, once on your turn, once as your reaction as well, so twice in a round. Just one quick note, as far as trying to make that work, rules as written, if you have a DM that's kind of a stickler for this, the way that you'll have to do it is have your familiar hold its action when it's its turn, say hold its action to take the help action when it sees the cleric cast a spell on you, right? So as soon as that happens, it would swoop in, take the help action, fly away, and then the blender would get to make their reaction attack with advantage. At our table, our DMs tend to be a little bit hand wavy there and say, yeah, if you want your familiars to help, just you tell me who the familiar's helping, and then I know on their turn they'll get advantage on that attack. But your DM might not work that way. So at level 6, for the battery, you get Channel Divinity twice per short rest instead of once, which is nice. So that means more spell slots for us, because now Harness Divine Power is usable twice per long rest. So now you're going to be able to turn more Channel Divinities into spell slots, which is great. You also get an embodiment of the Law feature as an Order Cleric, which means that Wisdom times per day, so 3 for us right now, Wisdom bonus times per day, I should say. An enchantment spell with a casting time of action can now be cast as a bonus action. That's not going to be huge for us, but for example, Bless is an enchantment spell. So now, right at round 1, you don't have to take a round to set this up. You can just Bless as a bonus action and make your weapon attack. So that's kind of nice. Get us into combat right from the get-go. Damage report for level 6. All right. So just to recap what's happening in combat here, I'm assuming that every turn the blender is getting 3 attacks, right? Attack, extra attack, bonus action attack, with a plus D4 to hit because you've got Bless going, plus advantage on all of those attacks. You're getting rage bonus damage. You're getting sneak attack on one of those hits on your turn, with a 4th reaction attack that also gets the sneak attack and rage and the D4 to hit and is made with advantage. And don't forget your Barbarian Zealot damage on your turn if you make a hit for another D6 plus half of your Barbarian levels. Anyway, it's a lot of damage, right? Meanwhile, the battery on their turn is casting a spell on the blender to get them that bonus attack, and then making a single booming blade weapon attack on their turn with a plus D4 to hit. I'm assuming that they're including themselves in the Bless spell. It might be better off going somewhere else. I don't know that, so I'm going to say you've got Bless for now. The battery has, including the Harness Divine Power twice per day, has 12 spell slots to burn. on theoretically buffing and healing their blender. Is that truly going to get you a reaction attack out of every single turn throughout the entire day? Probably not. Depends on your DM. You know, if you're getting 2 combat encounters between a long rest, which isn't inconceivable, then yeah, it is pretty sustainable. If you're getting more than that, no, not necessarily, right? And of course, for that matter, you may be using spell slots to do other things, heal other people, buff other people, resurrect somebody who's died, etc. But, you know, for now, we're just going to say when this is happening and you're actually able to get that 4th attack out of your blender every turn against an enemy with a 10 armor class, between the two of you, you're going to be averaging 71 damage per round. And against an enemy with a 15 armor class, you're going to be averaging 67 damage per round, because most of that damage is being made with advantage from your blender, and that's a lot of damage. At level 7, the blender is Rogue 2, and you get Cunning Action, which means that you can, as a bonus action, dash, disengage, or hide. And those things normally take an action. Do those things when you need to. The battery at level 7 gets level 4 spells. So Death Ward. Death Ward is a fantastic one. This is how it reads, and I quote, "You touch one blender, giving it a reaction attack, and grant it a measure of protection from death." So if the target would go unconscious, it instead only goes to 1 hit point. And the spell ends, lasts 8 hours, no concentration. And if something would kill it outright, like, power word kill, right? It just negates that thing completely. So that is really powerful. Freedom of Movement is another good 4th level spell here. It's you touch one blender and it can't be slowed or restrained, basically. And it gets a bonus reaction attack because you're an Order Cleric. At level 8, your blender is a Rogue 3, and your sneak attack damage goes to 2d6 every time you are using it, so 4d6 per round for us, potentially. And you get your roguish archetype. I'm taking Phantom, but you know what? The reality is, if we're just talking sustained damage, for our purposes, for as far as we are going to analyze this build, the rogue archetype, no rogue archetype really increases your sustained damage. The rogue archetypes give lots of fantastic options, sometimes for mobility or utility or burst damage, kind of expendable resource once in a while extra damage, and or defense and great role play and all these kinds of things. But for just pure sustained damage, there's really not one that you can just count on increasing your damage round after round, right? That said, Phantom is my favorite here for a couple of reasons. One, I think thematically it is the best fit, because this character is obsessed with religion and being easily brought back from death, and obsessed with killing things, and just kind of that whole life death obsession that the Phantom supposedly has, I think works really well for this character. That this character strikes me as someone who, would fit that sort of description. But also you get some cool features. So the Phantom Rogue gets Whispers of the Dead, which gives you a skill or tool proficiency that you didn't already have, and you can swap that out per short rest. You get Whispers from the Grave. A ghost tells you how to be really good at using a flute, or artisan tools, or survivability, right, or whatever you may need at the time. So that's nice utility. You also get Wails from the Grave, which is our damage for this subclass. So proficiency bonus times per day. So for us at level 8, that's 3, be 4 soon. When you deal sneak attack damage to a creature, you can target a second creature that's within 30 feet, and you roll half of the sneak attack dice. So if we're rolling 2d6 for sneak attack, then you would get to roll 1d6 if you're using Wails from the Grave, and you deal that to, that creature within 30 feet, that second creature. You know what? That's a nice little bump to help push an enemy over the edge and into the grave. At level 8, your battery gets a few things. So Destroy Undead jumps to a challenge rating of 1 or lower. If the undead creature fails their turn undead save, they are just... and you get Divine Strike. So now, again, this was another reason why I wanted to focus on making melee attacks. When you make a melee weapon attack once per turn, and that's all we're doing, you get an extra 1d8 on that attack, and it should work with Booming Blade, because as part of Booming Blade, you make a weapon attack. For some reason, your DM may rule otherwise, but I think rules as written, you apply both the Booming Blade damage and the Divine Strike damage. And that's nice. You get an ability score increase or a feat. And, pretty soon concentration is going to matter even more than it already does. So I'm going with Resilient Constitution here to give you a +1 to your Constitution, and it was a 17, so now it's 18. So that bumps our bonus, right? And it lets you add your proficiency to your concentration, and therefore, to your Constitution, and therefore your concentration saving throws. At level 9, your blender is a rogue 4, and so you get another ability score increase or feat. And this is a bit of a conundrum. I think at this point, especially, there's sort of this fork in the road, and you need to decide, okay, is my party looking for me to be primarily a frontline fighter that can soak up damage while dealing a bunch of damage too, or are they really needing me to be a rogue and to fill that rogue role in the party, right? I'm assuming, because of the way that I'm building this character, that our primary function is as frontline fighter, even though we're a rogue. And so for that reason, for me, I would take Tough here, because Tough gives you 2 additional hit points per level. It's almost like getting a +4 to your Constitution, right? Other than you don't get the benefit to your Constitution saves and things, but still 2 extra hit points per level. And for us, where we have resistance to most damage types that you'll probably be taking in game, hit points are just worth a lot. And finding ways to bump our AC is maybe less good for us, because since our enemies are going to have advantage on us all the time, and our AC isn't super high anyway, you're going to get more mileage out of hit points. That said, again, if you need to be functioning more as a rogue for your party, you're probably going to want to be bumping your dexterity here, so that you can be better at stealth, so that you can have a better armor class. That's nice, but be better at your thieves' tools to disarm traps and all those kinds of things that rogues need dexterity for. You might even want to consider taking a medium armor master, which will not make you have disadvantage on your stealth checks if you're wearing armor that otherwise imposes disadvantage, like half plate, which you should hopefully have some half plate right now. And then it will also let you benefit by a +3 to your armor class. Your dexterity bonus, can give you a +3. Normally medium armor's capped at +2. We've only had a 14 dexterity till now, so that hasn't mattered. But, if you're going to go this route, obviously you're going to be putting points into your dexterity, so that will benefit you and get your armor class higher. The reality is this character, the way that I've built them, is just not a great rogue. You could build it differently so that they could be, right? But because we're needing strength for our weapon attacks, the build is just super mad. It's super multiple ability score dependent, right? If you're going to try and be a good rogue. I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just going to be a little more difficult for you, and your damage will suffer. Level 9 battery. So this is a really good level for us. We get some great level 5 spells. Greater Restoration. No self-respecting healer should leave home without it, right? It cures all sorts of ailments, and when you need it, you really need it. Mass Cure Wounds is a good one. It's Cure Wounds, but applied to multiple people, so it's nice for a big group heal. My favorite for this build in particular is Holy Weapon. So you touch one weapon, and unfortunately you're touching the weapon, so you're not casting the spell on the blender, so they don't get to make an extra attack when you do this. But anyway, you touch a weapon, and for 1 hour, any attack made with that weapon does an extra 2d8 of damage. That's potentially 8d8 of damage on your blender's turn and reaction attack, right? And more on a crit, of course. These are dice, so they get to double when you get a crit. And since your blender's making attacks with advantage, you have almost a 10% chance to crit on every one of those dice rolls. So that's gonna come into play quite often. I love this idea now of this blender, and it really is a blender, right? With a double-bladed scimitar. It's like the blender blade. It's just like, I mean, they're putting out so much damage, and this was another reason why we went with the double-bladed scimitar, because again, the Holy Weapon affects the double-bladed scimitar, meaning you're going to get that 2d8 on every attack you make with it, whether it's the main hand portion, the 2d4 portion, or the 1d4 bonus action portion, right? And that's why this is even better. One more reason why this is better than two-weapon fighting here for this blender build. One thing to note about Holy Weapon, as a bonus action on your turn, you can dismiss the spell and cause an explosion of light to potentially damage and blind all enemies within 30 feet, depending on if they make their saving throw or not. That's pretty strong. It's a nice AoE, and blind is a really great condition to inflict on your enemies. It makes them have disadvantage on attacks they make, and everybody else has advantage on attacks made against the enemy that's blinded. So that's great. I wouldn't do it unless it's a pretty big group and or you're reasonably sure that they're going to fail their saves, because you do over time, round over round, at the end of an encounter, give up a lot of potential damage, 8d8 potentially on that blender. So I would hesitate to detonate the Holy Weapon unless you really need it. Speaking of damage report, level 9. So again, blender is getting 4 attacks in a round, most of the time at least, right? With, advantage, with an extra 2d8 on each attack that lands from Holy Weapon, plus 2 for rage, plus 5 for your strength bonus, an extra 2d6 of sneak attack damage on 2 of those 4 hits, assuming that the reaction one lands, right? Plus a d6 plus 2 for your Divine Fury on one of the attacks in a turn. So much damage. The battery is using concentration for Holy Weapon, assuming they have a 5th level spell slot, meaning, of course, no bless, but they are getting 1d6 for their weapon, plus 2d8 for Booming Blade and Divine Strike on those weapon attacks, plus their strength bonus. At this point, your battery has 16 spell slots with the help of Harness Divine Power in a day to potentially burn through to give your blender that 4th attack. And, if most combat counters last 5-6 rounds, which I think statistically, if you look it up, that's pretty typical, you should have enough spell slots to consider that fairly sustainable, assuming 3 actual combat encounters per long rest. Again, results may vary depending on your Dungeon Master, but assuming this is sustainable damage, you can pretty much count on doing, against an enemy with a 10 armor class, 122 damage per round between the two of you, and against an enemy with a 16 armor class, 110 damage per round between the two of you. That's pretty impressive. At level 10, your blender is a Rogue 5. Your sneak attack damage goes to 3d6 every time you get to use it, and you get Uncanny Dodge. This feature is super fantastic for our survivability. When you get hit by an attack, you can, as a reaction, have the damage as often as you want, as long as it is an attack that hits you, right? So if we're talking spells, Scorching Ray, yes, because they're making an attack roll. Fireball, no, because that's a saving throw on your part to avoid damage, right? We'll get something to deal with Fireball shortly. So Uncanny Dodge is awesome. And yes, it stacks with your reduction from rage. So potentially, if it's bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, you could Uncanny Dodge and only take a quarter damage on the thing that hit you. Now, of course, the big drawback here is that it takes your reaction. So you would not get an extra attack that round from your Order Cleric casting a heal on you. So, great to use if your battery's running low on juice, and or they need to actually freaking cast a healing spell on somebody else, you selfish bastard. Stop hogging all of their attention and spell slots. Or if it's just a really big hit and you're getting low and you need to stay on your feet, and you need to have that damage, always a great option. Just make sure that you communicate, obviously, with your battery to let them know, in character, of course, that your reaction is unavailable that round. So don't cast a spell on you unless they need to keep you alive or whatever, right? Okay, level 10 battery. You get Divine Intervention. It's super cool. It's super thematic. It lets you call on your god for a special boon or big, huge help in the game. And it almost never works in my experience. I'm sure when it does, it's awesome. I'd love to hear your stories about when Divine Intervention did something cool for your character or your party. I've never seen it. Not that I can recall anyway. We haven't had a ton of clerics. We've had a few. Anyway, I'm sure one day it'll work and it'll be really awesome. Level 11, the Blender is a Rogue 6, and you get Expertise, which is fantastic. Another bump of expertise, another round of expertise, I guess. So again, 2 more skills that you're not currently that you are proficient with. You get to double your proficiency. So obviously take whatever you and your party need most. If you're trying to be the party rogue, you should at least at this point have, expertise in stealth, in your thieves tools, perception probably to detect traps and hidden doors and things, and maybe either investigation or sleight of hand at this point. So you've got a pretty good suite of rogue skills. The battery at level 11. Your Destroy Undead now goes to a challenge rating of 2 or lower. That's awesome. Your Booming Blade damage jumps by another d8 on the attack and if they move. So now that's an extra 3d8 of damage plus your weapon when you make a weapon attack. That's pretty good. And you get 6th level spells. Heal is my favorite. It's 70 hit points straight up. You just heal for 70 hit points on one target. It'll scale if you upcast it, and it even cures blindness and deafness and disease. There are lots of other really cool, powerful 6th level spells. Find one that you like and have fun. At level 12, your Blender is a Rogue 7. Your sneak attack goes up yet again to 4d6 every time you get to use it, and you get Evasion. This is another just fantastic, tanky rogue skill, and if nothing else, creating this character has really made me realize just how powerful a rogue tank can be. And I know I've had a lot of you request that I do a rogue tank, and I will. I don't know when exactly. Probably won't be too much longer. And we're probably already seeing, kind of the base of what I think I have in mind for it. But anyway, Evasion is great. When you can see the effect that's causing you to make a dexterity saving throw to not take damage, so a trap, fireball, etc., right? If you fail the save, you still only take half damage. If you make the save, you take no damage. And keep in mind that because you're a barbarian, and you got whatever the name of that ability is that I can't think of right now off the top of my head, you have advantage on those saving throws. So chances are you are not going to be taking a lot of damage from any of those kind of dexterity save or take damage things. You can have the damage of pretty much anything in the game right now. almost. And you can reduce it to a fourth if you really need to on a lot of it. So very cool. Your battery at level 12, you get yet another ability score increase or feat. And so again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but what I'm interested in doing here is exploring what is possible damage-wise, right? And not necessarily saying this is what you should do. I just want to explore what's possible from a sustained damage per round perspective. And then let you decide where you want to scale back my suggestions to let it be more practical, if not the absolute extreme of what's possible for damage. So for that reason, I'm taking strength here to make sure that my weapon attacks land and that they do a little more damage. You very well may decide to go otherwise, and I would probably even encourage you to go otherwise. Wisdom bump is always good here. Warcaster is a strong choice, because then you would almost never drop concentration, right? Because you'd have advantage on your concentration checks. Plus, it lets you cast spells with somatic components if you have your hands full of, say, a weapon and a shield, for example. And it lets you take a booming blade attack as an opportunity attack if you ever get one. So lots of great things out of Warcaster. My other favorite potential option here would be Interception, the fighting style. Well, you'd have to take Fighting Initiate, and then take the fighting style Intercept, which is new from Tasha's, and I've talked about it before. I love it, especially in this team, because it lets you, if you're standing within 5 feet of your blender, say, and they take damage, you can intercept some of that damage. It's a D10 plus your proficiency bonus, so that's almost 10 damage on average anytime they get hit, and you use your reaction to do it. But considering that they're taking half damage on almost everything, you're really soaking up more like closer to 20 damage, if you were to use that. So very powerful, really increases the survivability of your blender and or the other components of your party. It's a great support ability. Again, I'm taking strength just because I want to explore what's possible. So at level 13, your blender is a rogue 8. You get another ability score increase or feat. And again, because I'm assuming that this guy is a frontline fighter first and a sneaky lockpicker second, I'm taking Constitution to bump my hit points and saves. Again, of course, if you're the primary rogue in your party, go Dex or something else like we've discussed. At level 13, the battery gets level 7 spells. There are lots of great world-bending, mind-altering stuff here. Have fun. Damage report for level 13. Against an enemy with a 10 armor class, this combo can expect on average to do 144 damage per round. And against an enemy with a 17 armor class, it's 129. At level 14, your blender is a rogue 9. Your sneak attack damage goes to a 5d6 every time you get it. And phantoms get a cool feature called Tokens of the Departed. So when someone within 30 feet of you dies, it can be an enemy. As a reaction, no extra attack this turn or uncanny dodge. But as a reaction, you can create a soul trinket. And it creates this little trinket in your hand. You can have up to your proficiency bonus of them, so 5 for us right now. And when you have one in your possession, it gives you advantage on your death saves and your constitution saves, which is really nice in and of itself. But then also, when you do your sneak attack damage, you can destroy one of these and immediately then do Wails from the Grave without expending a use of our Wails of the Grave. Which is super cool. So it just gives you more opportunities to do that. It's almost sustainable. If you didn't have to use a reaction in order to create one every time, I might throw it into the number crunching. Or you can also crush one to ask a spirit of the dead a question, which it may or may not answer truthfully. But it's still a really cool roleplay opportunity, no question, if nothing else. At level 14, your battery gets their destroy undead goes to a challenge rating of 3. which is awesome. And Divine Strike now does an extra 2d8 of damage on a weapon attack. So you get an extra 4d8 of damage on that single weapon attack once per turn now, assuming Booming Blade, right? Which feels pretty strong for a single weapon attack for a cleric. At level 15, your blender is a rogue 10, and rogues get an extra ability score increase, or feat, compared to most other classes anyways, here at level 10. So again, I'm probably taking my constitution to 18. You do what you need to do. At level 15, your battery gets level 8 spells. There are only 4 options. They're all cool, especially Holy Aura is my favorite aura. Take what looks the coolest. At level 16, your blender is a rogue 11. Your sneak attack damage goes to 6d6. And you get a cool roguish feature called Reliable Talent. Anytime you make an ability check on something that you're proficient in, a 9 or less on the die when you roll it counts as a 10. So especially if it's something that you have expertise proficiency in, you should very rarely be failing any of those stealth checks and things now, right? At level 16, your battery gets your final ability score increase or feat, at least as far as we're concerned. Again, I'm taking my strength to 20. If you'd rather be smart, I'd take Warcaster or Fighting Initiate, maybe, whichever you didn't take last time, or bump your wisdom. I mean, our wisdom's still only a 16, which for a pure cleric seems stupid. I realize that, but I've explained myself and I don't need to do it anymore. This character needs more feats and ASIs. At level 17, your blender is a rogue 12, and you get your final ability score increase, and I'm going to cap our constitution at 20. And the battery at level 17. Booming Blade gets yet another 1d8 bump. So now, between Booming Blade and Divine Strike, you're doing an extra 5d8 of damage on that one weapon attack that you're making each turn. Plus 4d8 if they move, right? If you hit them with Booming Blade and they move, that's a lot of damage. Your Destroy Undead goes to a challenge rating of 4 or less. So, man, those undead, you're just wiping out hordes of them. And Order Clerics get their capstone ability, Order's Wrath. Honestly, if it weren't for this, I might not have even been suggesting taking strength all along the way, despite my own argument to the contrary. This says that if you, once per turn, if you deal Divine Strike damage to a target, then you can curse it when you hit it in that way. And the next time, the next ally that hits it, it takes an extra 2d8 of psychic damage. So that's an extra 2d8 of damage for us, essentially, the cleric. That's who I'm attributing that damage to anyway. And that's awesome. So I really want my cleric's hits to land. You also get level 9 spells, which is fantastic. Especially Mass Heal is my favorite. It heals 700 damage to as many allies as you want, divvied up as you see fit. It's rare that this spell would not heal your entire party to full, even at level 17, depending on how close you are to death and how many hulking barbarians you have in your party, I guess. But anyway, fantastic. Final damage report against an enemy with a 10 armor class. This team, built in this way, can expect to do 178 damage per round, and on average, and against an 18 armor class, it's just a little less, 165. So much damage. All right, final thoughts. The question that I have, of course, is, well, how does this combo stack up to the other 2 team builds that I've done so far? The Yin Yang, which was basically a double Hexblade Warlock with a little bit of Sorcerer thrown in on one of them and a little Fighter on the other. But anyway, and the other was the Brainy and the Beast, the Wizard Druid kind of area damage, area control combo. Check the graph, see for yourself. But it holds its own for damage per round. Early on, it's kind of in the middle of the pack for damage until higher enemy armor class, at which point it actually takes the lead over anything. Past the mid-game, the yin-yang becomes pretty unbeatable for just pure damage per round. And I don't know if anything is ever going to be able to compete with the reverse gravity prismatic wall combo that we were getting from Brainy and the Beast. But the thing that I love about this particular team, the blender and the battery, you get not only really great sustainable for the most part damage per round from a 2-character team up, but one of them is a fantastic support character that can do, they're not just doing damage. I mean, they've got plenty of ability to heal and help their team out, right? Keep them alive, resurrect, buff, all those things. And then in the other character, you've got someone who's not only spitting out insane amounts of damage, but is drawing enemy fire, pretty survivable as a tank, and can even function as a rogue depending on how you build them. Even if you build them as I've done, they can make a passing rogue, right? A B level rogue for all things stealthy and lockpicky and disarmy of trappy. So you get a lot more, I think, versatility out of this combo of characters that can fill these important roles in a party, but also do insane damage. It's almost like you could have these two, and then also have 2 other characters that are just focused on damage and or maybe control. And as a party, as a foursome, you'd be a juggernaut of sustained damage per round. One thing that I think might potentially be difficult for this team up is it would really take, I think, the right personality to play that battery role. It would be a ton of fun to play, but this character would have to, I think, really be the type that would be okay sort of letting their blender kind of hog the spotlight a lot. I mean, come on, nobody is more loved at a table than your support healer character, right? We all know that. And as I've been saying, so much of that damage that the blender is pumping out is actually your damage battery. They would not be able to even come close to the levels of damage per round that they're putting out if it weren't for you giving them all that juice, right? So anyway, that's the show for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I don't have any other announcements to make because I made them all at the beginning. So I love you guys. You're awesome. Thanks so much for your support, and I hope you have the best day ever. We'll see you soon.